All right. Well, this evening I am pleased to welcome Jason R. Lady to the show. He has written several books, including Monster Problems, which you can hopefully see back here. Super Problems. Oh, nice. See, there we go. Super Problems and Time Problems, which we will talk more about here in just a moment. Jason grew up in a military family. He moved around a lot across the United States and abroad as a kid, which I find very fascinating. One of my closest friends also grew up in a military family. His family read books a lot. I was listening to another show that you were on, and sounded like movies and TV were not big things, but books were, which perhaps was some foreshadowing, as they say.
Yeah.
He manages to balance a career in human resources along with writing, which I think is incredibly impressive. And and he's noted that his wife has been a great supporter to him as well as his writing. I think you mentioned she's kind of helped with some editing stuff, that's really cool. And thankfully, he's a good friend of the show now because he's a huge fan of 80s pop culture, which we'll talk about later. But so he's a big fan of that stuff, visiting baseball stadiums and watching Marvel movies. So Jason, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah. Did I miss anything in the overview here of your bio? Anything I may have left out?
I don't think so. No, I think you covered all the bases pretty well. That's the interesting or not so interesting bio of Jason Lady and everything there is about him. So
Yeah.
no, I think you touched all the bases there.
Okay, awesome. And just a quick side, so you like to visit baseball stadiums. So the really important question I have is, have you been to Wrigley Field, and why is it your favorite baseball field?
I'm ashamed to say I have not been to Wrigley Field. That's one I haven't been to. And I really have no excuses. I live in Cleveland, which is probably 6 hours from Chicago.
Yeah.
I've been to the White Sox Stadium. I have not been to the Cubs Stadium. So
Well,
please don't use it against me.
Well, that concludes our interview. So thank you for having me. No.
Yeah, we're done here now.
Yeah. Oh, it's okay. I grew up outside of Chicago, so I'm very biased towards the Chicago Cubs and have an emotional attachment to Wrigley Field. But that's for another time. But someday,
the 2016 World Series,
yeah,
where the Cubs beat the then Indians.
Yes, I know. Yes, which I stayed up to watch and cried as I was eating peanut butter M&Ms. But again, that's for another time.
We stayed up and cried too, but for different reasons. Also, we're binge eating and crying.
Right, exactly. It's a good
end of the emotion spectrum.
Right, it's a good combination, especially at early in the wee hours of the morning.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, we'll get back on track here. I have a tendency to do that. So, before we get into your really fun books, which I thoroughly enjoyed reading and getting to know, I mentioned, and you've said, that you grew up in a military family and moved around quite a lot. Can you tell us a little bit about what that looked like for you as a kid?
Sure. As you can imagine, moving around has its pluses and minuses. Probably 7 times total in my time when I was living with my family before I left the house, to go to college. Not as much as some other kids do. Some kids move almost every year, every 2 years. We're pretty fortunate to be in one place for a 6-year stint once, a 4-year stint another time, which is kind of unusual. But, as far as pluses and minuses, obviously the pluses are, getting to meet new people, see new places. We got to live in Germany several times. I lived there kindergarten through 5th grade, as well as 10th through 12th grade. Wow. And it was fantastic. Yeah. Especially when you're a younger kid and you're living in Bavaria, it's like you're living like in a fairy tale, cobblestone streets, the architecture, castles.
Oh my gosh.
All that cool stuff, museums. Then living over there in high school was just amazing. We did Model United Nations at The Hague when they were in session. We did our high school drama club, went to London and saw a play, then went to Stratford-on-Avon.
Oh my God.
Lots of historical stuff that we got to see, of course, my family sightseeing, but also like our class, like history class, would go out and see a battlefield or something. So all that stuff was right there in our backyard, a train ride or a bus ride away. And that was fantastic. I wouldn't trade that for anything. Something that made it hard, though, was obviously the saying goodbye and, to friends over and over again. You kind of accept it as kind of part of life. This is just part of the deal, of what we do. You don't really know anything else,
Right. Yeah.
I was in the Army when I was born, so I didn't really know any different. But, there were some really good friends I had to say goodbye to along the way. And that was hard. And when you're a military kid, you don't really have a hometown to go back to see everybody again.
Yeah.
So I've encountered that where, they are scattered all over the country at
Yeah.
this point. And it's really hard to get together and see everybody. And so if you have a nostalgia for a sense of place, it ends up being 2 or 3 different places. And some of them are not easy to get to. And some of these Army bases I can't get on at this point. I'm not a military dependent anymore without getting permission to be able to go on. And the places in Germany, I got to spend a lot of money to get on an airplane. And, it just won't be the same. No one is there that you knew before. And that it's a time and a place that's in the past, and you have to kind of enjoy it for what it was and know it was great and you had fun then, but it's never going to be quite the same as it was. You can't even really go back there that easily. So
Sure.
Yeah, pros and cons for sure.
Yeah. And one interesting, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, one thing I think I read about your sort of backstory was that one way that you sort of connected with other kids, because you were always moving around, was you would draw pictures for them. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. I would go to new schools, and I think every kid in a new school, you're always kind of looking for your niche. How do you fit in? Are you into sports? Are you into music? What is it? And for me, it was drawing. I always loved drawing pictures, and then eventually drawing my own comic books, writing my own stories. And so when I'd make my new friends or be in a new class, I would put all the kids as characters into the story that I was writing. And they would get wind of that, and they'd be like, "Oh, let me read that. I want to see what happens to my character." And it would get passed around and read on the bus and in class, and it was a really cool creative outlet. Yeah, it was neat. Got me over the fear of having my work read by others pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Because it was being read by dozens of other people, all the different schools I went to.
Yeah.
But it really helped kids from all over the place that didn't know each other bond. We kind of bonded together over that. And there was some friendly arguments over, especially for when I had them all as superheroes, whose superhero could beat whose superhero. My powers are better than yours. I could beat yours in a fight. And I'd have to resolve the dispute in the story usually. And usually I just have it be a draw, so everybody would be happy.
Yeah.
But it was really a powerful kind of bonding agent looking back at that. It wasn't anything I was doing on purpose, though. It's the interesting thing about it. I just kind of did it instinctively, and other kids kind of coalesced around it. So it was pretty cool.
Wow, that sounds like the plot of a movie or something like that. That is so awesome. Like, what a great idea that just kind of came out of nowhere to, make people feel included, kind of including everybody. And I know for me growing up, I always admired the kids that were artistic and could draw, because that was just never a strength of mine, something that didn't come naturally. Not that I put much effort into getting any better at being an artist, but I always looked up to those kids that could draw. And my sister was a really great artist as well. So that is so cool. I think if we had gone to school together, I would have been like, "What are you drawing? That is so awesome. Can you show me how to do that? Because I don't know how to draw anything." My artistic ability is, if I drew a picture now versus in like second grade, it would be very similar.
Not much has changed since
No,
then.
not at all. Still draw birds the same way. Ridiculous. It has not progressed at all.
Well, it's interesting because I feel like what became more important to me was just telling stories after a while. And that's why I actually dropped the drawing aspect of it and just started writing my stories. Because when you're drawing a comic book, you have to have so much more patience. It takes so much more time to create it and to make a story happen from start to finish. I kind of lost patience with that. And so I let the drawing kind of fall by the wayside. I still doodle a little bit, kind of conceptual kinds of things, or if I'm bored, especially if I'm in the middle of a lecture kind of environment, I'm like, "Oh, I'm just going to doodle over here while I listen." But I really, just started writing out my stories in notebooks when I was in high school, big spiral bound notebooks, just full of just line by line, handwritten, no computer at the house, no word processor, that was what you had to do.
Right. So I guess the big question is then, were you team wide rule or team college rule?
Oh, probably college rule, because you could fit more on the page. Yeah.
Thank God. Because again, between the Wrigley Field, and if you would have said wide rule, then that would have concluded.
Another strike against me, waiting for strike 3, right?
Yeah, exactly. Oh, that's too funny. But I still do stuff in notebooks too. Even I have a notebook that has all of my podcast stuff in it, and so I have all of my different ideas for shows. I just still, for me to be able to remember things and just writing it down, I just, for some reason, still can't go to, I don't automatically think like my phone or my computer. I always think like notebook, and I take a notebook with me everywhere in my bag, just on a daily basis, just because I'm always thinking of things I need to do or ideas. So that's so cool that you saved that. Have you saved any of that stuff? Those things that you wrote, drew with your kids in school or early stories. Have you saved some of that stuff, or have your parents saved it?
Yeah, between my parents and myself, we have a few things still. I have a couple of those notebooks that I mentioned filled with handwritten stories,
Yeah.
like novel length stuff. I just wrote line by line. And then actually my mom visited recently and brought like a big pouch filled with all sorts of hand-drawn cartoons when I was a kid. And
Wow.
it was a trip going through that. There was just stuff I'd forgotten I'd done.
Yeah.
In fact, the villain of my second book, Super Problems, he's a living stinky sock. He's a villain I made up when I was in fourth grade. And to see the original stinky sock, it came from the hamper is the name of the story.
Yeah.
See the original story with him as the villain and be like, wow, he's actually in a published book now. That's pretty cool. Little kid Jason may not have fathomed that if you told him that.
Yeah. That is so amazing. What a cool, what a neat story of how that came together. That is so awesome. And I think a stinky sock would be a good villain. That makes complete sense.
Yeah. And I think something like that, it's kind of funny, kind of gross. It's definitely the kind of middle school kids get into, and find amusing. And me as a middle school kid at heart, I find that amusing too.
Nice. Good. That's good. It's good to be easily amused. That's how I feel too, is, if you can laugh and be easily amused, that is a huge gift. I definitely agree with that. And
also life. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So at what point in your life were you sort of thinking, I'm really enjoying writing and creating these characters. I think that I want to do something with this. When do you think that sort of moment happened for you?
Sure. I think that was probably in college. I was taking creative writing classes and minoring in creative writing. I figured I'd minor in something I really loved and really, really enjoyed, in addition to what I was majoring in. And I think it was kind of around that time I was like, I could probably do something like this. I think before that, it was very much just a hobby, just kind of something I did, never really had any aspirations to do anything with it. Some of my friends would say, hey, you're going to be a famous novelist. You're going to be a famous comic book writer. And, I'd be kind of like, I don't know. It's hard to make a living doing that. I don't know if that would happen. But in college, I really started to think about it. And when I was in my 20s, after I left college, that's when I really started to try to put something together, like a manuscript that I'd be serious about sending to publishers and be polished enough and a good enough concept to send to publishers. So it was really kind of in young adulthood where that kind of started, that process of wanting to get published.
Wow. Yeah, it's certainly a leap of faith to decide that you want to do something and sort of put yourself out there. So I give you a lot of credit. A good friend of mine is sort of in that process right now. She's been working on writing children's books for years and years and years and taking classes and writing screenplays and all kinds of stuff. And, she's going to have something published, but it really sounds like, from what I understand, certainly requires a lot of patience and persistence to get something published.
Yeah, absolutely. Really have to persevere. And that's what I tell everybody who wants to publish a book. Do anything kind of similar. It's like you just can't stop doing it. You have to keep going. And you have to be willing to cast aside some manuscripts where you're like, okay, that idea just isn't working, or at least it's not working right now. It took me 13 years to get my first book published. Now, I think I'm a bit of an outlier. I've heard the average is about a decade, like 10 years, the process to get published, if you don't stop. So I don't want to scare anybody who's listening to this. Oh my gosh, I can't possibly do that. But and if I had stopped along the way and been like, I can't do this anymore, obviously I wouldn't have gotten published. So it really is a matter of just not giving up and believing in yourself and believing in the book that you've written, that there is an audience for it out there and there is a niche for it. Just a matter of finding it.
Yeah. Well, that's amazing that you were willing to, like you said, persevere, because that's certainly a big time commitment. But if you, hopefully believe in what you're doing enough, and as they say, I think with like podcasting too, if you're passionate about something, and for you, it sounds like kind of hitting this, demographic of, the middle school age kids, which we'll talk about in a minute, which I think is amazing. That's just like so key. And that's so great that you were able to sort of stick it out and see it through, because I think, the books are just a lot of fun. I was just telling my wife about it. She's a middle school principal and is always in cahoots with the librarian, and she's really up on young adult literature. So I was telling her about it because it's just kind of fun to reminisce about sort of that. I don't know, the just being in middle school and sort of being carefree and, thinking that you're, really independent and, everything, but yet know nothing.
Right.
It's certainly an interesting time period for people. So,
You think you're so grown up and you're really not.
right.
You know?
Yeah, exactly. Oh my God. Yeah. I unfortunately I think I misplaced most of my journals from middle school, which I wish I had them because that would just be comic gold right there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Journals, pictures, anything like that. Yeah, I'm glad it's all under lock and key somewhere. It does not
Yeah.
need to see the light of day.
Yeah, that's so true. It's in a landfill somewhere, so it's bad but good,
For the best.
in many ways. Yeah. So walk us through, how did can you tell us a little bit, more about your books and the characters, and sort of how did that sort of focus on those characters and those stories? How did that kind of come to fruition for you?
Sure. So, really it all started out with, what is my target audience? And I always wanted to write science fiction or fantasy books. And so I wrote a couple manuscripts that were, I think of them as practice now.
Yeah.
But I wrote them for adults and they weren't that good. They were all right, but, they weren't that great. It was very much practice.
Yeah.
And, it was actually my wife who suggested to me, she's like, Jason, you get along really well with middle school kids. You seem to hit it off with them. You kind of have those sensibilities, that sense of humor. She's
Yeah.
like, why don't you try writing for middle school kids? And I was like, that's an interesting thought. So, I did a little homework, kind of went to the bookstore, the library, flipped through some middle school books just to kind of see, okay, what does this entail in terms of, what kind of word choice can you use? How sophisticated can the plot be? All that kind of stuff. And then
Sure.
said, okay, I can kind of gear what I'm doing for that, pretty easily. And it really started with this idea for a magic pen that brings to life everything you draw. Of course, being a kid that drew a lot growing up, the concept really resonated with me. And
Yeah.
so my books are called the Magic Pen Adventures. You mentioned the titles earlier, Monster Problems, Super Problems, and Time Problems at this point, 3 of them. And each one stars a different middle school kid. And in each case, they get a hold of a magic pen that brings to life everything that they draw. And what happens, though, is at the beginning of the story, they're in some kind of quandary. They're having some kind of issue, some kind of problem, and they don't know what to do. And the magic pen is brought to their windowsill by a random crow and left there. It entices them to draw late at night, usually. They draw
Sure.
the picture without knowing this pen is magic yet. And the picture they draw is something cathartic they think will help with their problem. It really makes it worse when it becomes real the next day. And they're like, oh my gosh, what do I do? Be careful what you wish for kind of scenario.
Right.
But middle school kids are really fun to write for because they can appreciate some of the absurd scenarios that I write.
Yeah.
My stories, like things like a living stinky sock or a
Yeah.
superhero pig or a talking alpaca who's very vain and wants everybody to pamper him. They can really appreciate that kind of goofy, kind of absurd stuff. But at the same time, they are looking for a little bit more sophisticated plot development. They're beyond the picture book. They're past that point.
Right.
And so I can kind of get the best of both worlds because I like crafting plots. I like crafting characters and stories. But I also want to inject that humor and that absurdity and stuff. Kids get, teenagers, young adults, they kind of get beyond that a little bit. They get more serious and they're not really interested in the absurd anymore. So middle school kids are kind of my niche. They're kind of my wheelhouse, right where I need to be.
Yeah. Well, I think that's perfect. And I think the books really hit on that perfectly. I think like you're describing, because I think middle school is that great sort of combination of like, and I can think of myself sort of as a middle schooler, as you're still young enough that you might be into sort of like kid stuff. Like I know I was still playing with action figures and like X-Men and stuff. And wasn't, I'm not afraid to admit that I was, a full 100% a dork and into what I liked. And I'm grateful for it too. And if my kids are still playing silly stuff when they're in middle school, I think that's great, because you don't need to grow up so fast, so they're kind of, I think you hit a really great audience that are like still sort of into the magical, fun, lighthearted kind of silly stuff, but like you said, but more complex plot lines and stuff too. And I know as I was reading Monster Problems, which I think is the first one in the series,
Yes.
There's a scene where the teacher can kind of see what the kid has drawn, and he's sort of fighting off these robots or what are the Dudley Destroyers or
the Daily Destroyer.
Thank you, Daily. Yes.
Yeah.
The Daily Destroyer. Yeah. And, jumping on the desk and fighting. I just like, that is, could see that being so, it was appealing to me as an adult and I could see it in my head, but I could so see it as from a middle schooler's perspective too, of just envisioning like what would happen if my art teacher just like started fighting off these imaginary things, that the other kids can't see. That just is, just for lack of a better term, just a lot of fun,
Oh yeah. Kids engage in a lot of what if, what if this happened? What if that happened? A lot of daydreaming too. I did a ton of that,
Yes.
all through school, all well through high school, probably, and probably to this day.
Yeah.
And you look around and you imagine, what if this weird thing happened or that weird thing happened over there? And that's where a lot of these books are coming from, is those, things from their imagination springing forth and, becoming real in the real world and causing havoc and causing trouble.
Sure. Yeah, I know. And the thinking about how, the protagonist in Monster Problem specifically, wants to sort of get back at his little brother is something, again, that I could just relate to too, because I can certainly remember as a growing up that I always wanted to get back at my sister, and I would try to listen in on her phone calls. I remember sort of mixing something that I thought smelled bad and sticking it under her bed so her room would smell, which was like not effective, but that is like so spot on with,
Yes.
What somebody would want to do is, get back at their sibling. In my case, my sister was older, but I think you're able to connect with that audience really well.
Yeah, and you're right. My sister was older. She's 5 years older than me. So, the sibling rivalry I brought into Monster Problems isn't from personal experience, but I do know a lot of kids experience that. I have friends that were going through that with the kind of annoying younger sibling that they had to constantly deal with. So we brought that into that book. And really the part of that book that really relates to my real world school experience was getting in trouble for drawing in class. That really did happen to me, and got put out in the hallway and got in trouble, and my parents got called, and it was a whole thing. And all of these books are based on a real experience I had in middle school, like a real anxiety I had or something I worried about or problem I had. I remember laying awake the first night before 6th grade, not wanting to go to middle school, I'd be the youngest kid in the school again. And I heard the schoolwork is super hard. And that's what Time Problems is based on. The main character in that book, she doesn't want to go to middle school. And so the magic pen was her to freeze time. So the summer will never end. But that has all these repercussions that she didn't foresee. So it's like, be careful what you wish for. But I feel like that gives each book a bit of authenticity that kids pick up on. There's all the fun, silly fantasy stuff that's kind of around it. But there's that nugget in the middle of something real. And I think it's real no matter what generation you're at, whether you're old like me or, whether you're a kid now. I think some always resonate, no matter what.
Yeah. Yeah, I know middle school is really overwhelming. I spent some time as a middle school counselor, and my sister was a middle school teacher. Her wife is a middle school principal, and it's certainly an interesting, very bizarre time in kids' lives. And I always joked that I chaperoned a lot of dances when I was a middle school counselor. This is before we had kids, so I could, Friday night till 10 o'clock. Sure, I can chaperone. And I always joked that every school dance in middle school involves one girl who's crying in a corner, and everybody's huddled around her, and they don't understand why. And then all of the boys are like running around like crazy in the gym, and they're not really dancing, getting all sweaty, and and then there's a girl crying. So it's certainly an interesting time for people. But that's so great that you could incorporate stories from your upbringing into the stories. Are any of the other characters sort of based off of friends that you had or teachers that you encountered?
Yeah, there's definitely a couple. In Super Problems, the main character in that story draws himself and his friends as superheroes, and they all become superheroes. That's very much based on stuff I did growing up, because I'd always draw my friends as superheroes in my own comic books. That's exactly what happens in that story. And because it's the magic pen, they all really become superheroes. So the main character and his two buddies especially are very much based on my good friends when I lived in Fort Knox, Kentucky. And a lot of fond memories of hanging out with those two guys. And so I was like, I want to bring them into one of these stories and have characters that kind of resemble them. If you're really paying attention, if you really know them, you'll see them in these two. And then in Time Problems and a little bit in Super Problems, something I miss doing with my friends when I was a kid is like the sleepover. Myself and some other guys would just like have a sleepover. We'd play video games, we'd watch movies, stay up late, eat all this junk food, and then just crash and sleep till noon the next day usually.
Right.
And I just miss that camaraderie. It's not the same when you're an adult. You just don't do stuff like that anymore. And so in My Problems, the main character and her best friend, they'd have these epic sleepovers that they do, and they watch movies and eat junk food and do all those same things. So definitely some stuff based on my childhood experiences and my childhood friends for sure.
Nice. Yeah. Is there any, as you're sort of writing this, did it sort of stir up anything that you were, any sort of nostalgia besides like friends that you just remember from the time period that you were in middle school? Like any, music that you remember listening to or clothes that you remember wearing when you were in middle school?
Sure. So my middle school years were 1988 till about whatever 3 years later would be. I'm lousy at math. 1991. Yeah, there you go. Probably that period right there. So yeah, when I put myself back into the middle school mind frame, a lot of that stuff comes back. So like Paula Abdul, MC Hammer, Milli Vanilli, Madonna, all the music that was big late in the 80s, early in the 90s, it starts kind of coming back in a major way. And I put it on, my phone and listen to it while I'm writing just to kind of get that vibe.
Nice.
Sure.
What a great idea to kind of get back into that mindset. I like that a lot. Yeah. I think there was a meme lately, I think, and it said something like, if only Milli Vanilli could come back and see that people are lip syncing on TikTok, and get millions of views, and they get, those people get all kinds of praise, and then they had one cassette tape that didn't work right or whatever, and it changed the whole trajectory of their careers. Is just so crazy.
Ruined everything. Yeah, I wish they could find the real singers, and they could have had a career.
Right.
The frontmen guys weren't really the ones singing the songs, because there were some really solid pop songs that they put out there that I still like to this day.
Right.
And it's a shame there couldn't that whatever team was putting all that together, they couldn't have produced more, and instead it all came falling down because it was a facade, and that's really a shame.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. That's that could be like I think a show topic in and of itself, because that was just a crazy time, and I certainly can relate to loving Paula Abdul, because she, I think, is like the many a young person's soundtrack during the 80s and 90s. And I remember feeling very impressed with myself, because I was at a wedding, and when I was in probably like in elementary school or something like that, and the DJ at the wedding referred to me as a young Paula Abdul. So I really felt like,
wow, okay, quite a compliment.
This is gonna go somewhere. I'm gonna become a Lakers girl, a cheerleader, and go on to choreograph for Janet Jackson, and
pop star, and be a judge on American Idol. Yeah.
Exactly. So that's good stuff. I think we had similar music choices. That's for sure.
What part of what it was that was the heyday of MTV, and you alluded to earlier, my family we weren't really big into television, or if we had TV, we were watching VHS tapes. We weren't really watching like broadcast television, but there was a window of time, and it coincided with my middle school years, that we had cable, and by virtue we had MTV, and so that helped obviously propel Paula Abdul and all the others into our living room, and my sister and I were just like glued to this, loving it. And it wasn't just the music, it was also just the whole image and the music videos and everything that was projected there. And so I think about those times, it very much has a vibe, it very much has a time and a place that we don't have now. Very different now.
Oh, yeah, that's so sure that is for sure, because there's just so many outlets to gain information and listen to music. I think there was just a lot less resources where we were growing up. So I think when a new music video was coming out or whatever, that was like a really big deal, and was sort of like an event, and it was really exciting. And that's definitely so different now. But that's great that you can look back on your years in middle school fondly, and incorporate that into a story, because I know that for a lot of people, they the last place they want to think about is being in middle school, but it sounds like it was a positive experience for you, so that's a good thing.
Kind of yes and no. I mean, those are the good aspects I'm talking about.
Sure.
And, I tend to reflect on the good stuff, but middle school is awkward, as we all remember. You're caught between being a little kid and being a teenager, and you don't know what you are. And I think my books, and I think other middle school books that kind of had that picture of absurdity, I think it kind of plays into middle school kids are looking around and being like, the world is really like this, really? Adults act like that, really? They're thinking this stuff and thinking like, this is really bizarre. And the fact that books really push that bizarreness to the forefront and just make it reality in the stories is something that really plays well to them, I think.
Yeah, it's so true. I always joke that middle schoolers too, I feel like it's like not socially acceptable to kind of give an adult a compliment sometimes, because it's just like, you're like you said, I mean, a lot of kids think adults are just kind of odd, or their sense of humor is kind of strange. And it's also not socially acceptable to be, dressed appropriately for the weather. So if it's, -20
Right.
outside, who needs a winter coat? It's,
Yeah.
it's not necessary. I'll freeze. It's fine. Um, yeah. So one thing I wanted to ask is, you go to a lot of book festivals and author festivals and stuff like that, which is, I think, is so amazing. And I certainly encourage that kind of stuff. I try to do that a lot too. You gotta like kind of be out there and meeting people and stuff like that, which is just so important to kind of connect with other people. What are some of like the feedback that you've gotten from younger kids in middle school, or maybe their parents, about your stories?
Sure. One of the biggest pieces of feedback I've heard at book festivals, as well as just in reviews and stuff like that, is that it made them laugh. And that's
Hmm.
probably like one of the biggest compliments I can get, is that I
Yeah.
made people laugh and I made them smile. When I hear about even younger kids having the books read to them
Mhm.
by their grandparents or their parents, or kids just reading it on their own and them being like, your book is so funny.
Yeah.
That's like, okay, I've done a big part of my job right there, which I entertain them.
Yeah.
So definitely heard that about it being funny. And then, also kids, picking up some of those themes I talked about earlier, like, wow, this really has our voice. This really sounds like a real middle school kid. This really sounds like me, that they're seeing themselves in that, or adults, like us, like we've been doing right now, remembering what it was like and being
Yeah.
like, oh yeah, that's pretty authentic. That's kind of what it's like. These aren't, adults in kids' bodies in these books. These are actually kids, and they think
Right.
like kids and they talk like kids.
Right.
Hearing some of that feedback is just like, okay, I'm doing something right, when I hear stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah. I could see that. And then it was really fun. And I'm not just saying that because you're on the show, but I found, your book was just really fun to read and just so imaginative and creative, and was written in a way that was certainly, more complicated, but at the same time easy to digest, that, it's not, I think, really any sort of level reader would be able to enjoy it, and be able to sort of envision themselves in the story. And, especially when it involves tater tots, I think that helps a lot, because who doesn't like tater tots?
Yes.
So yeah.
Absolutely.
And is the character of a Blue Hood, who is a female character in, I know, this story, is she in some of the other ones as well?
She pops up in the other two books too. Yeah.
Okay.
Her and the art teacher, Mr. Octagon, appear in all three books. So the
Okay.
main cast of characters kind of changes, but
Yeah.
those two keep appearing as supporting characters. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, because one thing I kept thinking about is, I don't know if you ever read, I think it was Sideways Stories from Wayside School
Yes.
by is it Louis Sachar or something like, which again, I'm probably
Yeah.
butchering his name.
Louis Sachar. Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. It's like Illinois/Maine/ just, yeah, weird.
Oh,
It's
for
like,
all I know, I'm saying it wrong
yeah,
too. I think
yeah,
I've only seen it written down, so who knows?
yeah, I'm always butchering somebody's last name. It's on a daily basis. But it was kind of reminded me of the story, the Blue Hood character that kind of goes sort of unnoticed by a lot of
Mhm.
people
Yeah.
in the story. It reminded me of one of the stories in which, and I haven't read that book in 30 plus years. But anyways, it reminded me of there's a story where there's a kid, I think, that has like a hooded sweatshirt or something like that on in the Sideways Stories.
Mhm.
And it's like looking out the window, and people are always like, what's up with this kid? What's up with this kid? And then somebody, I think, finally like removes the hood, and there's like a mouse under there, or like a rat or something like that.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So it was just sort of reminding me of this, just sort of, kind of brought me back to,
Mhm.
books I read as a middle schooler too, or tweenager or whatever, as they call it now. It reminded me a lot of that series of just sort of the, misadventures of being in school, which is just, again, just so fun for, somebody my, our age that grew up reading that kind of stuff. I think stirred up some nostalgia in that way too.
Yeah, absolutely. That the book you mentioned, actually, and its tone, Sideways Stories from Wayside School,
Yeah.
very much feeds into my thoughts in terms of what tone do I want to bring to my
Mm.
books too. That kind of, silly, kind of zany, whimsical kind of feel.
Yeah.
And I also think about other books I was reading at that age. The Ramona books. I don't know if you remember those.
Yes, of course. Yes. Ramona
Beverly
Quimby.
Cleary. Yeah, those are so good. I was reading Encyclopedia Brown at that
Mhm.
time. Love
Yeah.
those books. Um, and those also were kind of fun, absurd. Like, here's this kid who's smarter than everybody else around him, is figuring out all the mysteries and stuff, and that's really a great power fantasy, right, for a kid. Like, okay, this
Sure.
kid is the one who's on the ball and knows what's going on and can fix everything.
Yeah.
The big series I also liked was it's not one that a lot of people, I think, remember now. It's called The Three Investigators.
Mhm.
They're kind of like the Hardy Boys, but they were younger. That was a cool thing about them. They weren't teenagers; they were
Yeah.
younger. And so I could get into them as a upper elementary school student and as a middle school kid. I could really get into them. And like, for example, they couldn't drive. And
Yeah.
so they actually had a chauffeur that drove them around, because the one kid entered a radio contest where you can have a limousine service for a day.
Mhm.
He was smart enough. He found a loophole in the contract and said, "Oh, we get this indefinitely, actually, because of this loophole." And so
Nice.
the organizers are kind of like, "Okay, I guess," And so they have this on-call chauffeur, but that's a consideration when you're writing books with middle school kids in them. How do they transport themselves around? Because they
Yeah.
can't. Everything has
That's
to be
so
within
true.
walking distance, or people are driving them. And
Yeah.
so there's just some cool stuff like that where I was like, "Oh, that's kind of cool." Wouldn't that be neat to be driven around in your own limousine, when you're a middle schooler?
Right.
But they're solving mysteries, and again, kind of like Encyclopedia Brown, they're doing things adults can't do, that are kind of helpless to do, and they're figuring things out.
Yeah.
So that was another one I really liked and really got
Yeah.
into.
Nice. Yeah, I'm not familiar with that one, but with the way that you're describing that, my youngest son, I think, would be really interested in that kind of stuff. He loves fantasy stuff and solving mysteries and stuff like that. I think he
Oh,
would
great.
really enjoy that
Really
series.
get into it. There's
Yeah.
a ton of them, so plenty to keep him busy for a while.
Okay, nice. Yeah, I did an episode a while back about the Babysitters Club,
Mm.
which was blockbuster hit, of course, back
yeah.
in the 80s. And I read. I didn't really read them a ton as a kid. I was more into nonfiction stuff, but reading it as an adult who has worked, I've worked very extensively with young people, and I really felt like, her voice too sounded a lot like a middle schooler voice too, which I think speaks to, why that book series was so popular. And I think why your stories are so fun too is because it feels like a 12-year-old kid is describing what's happening in their world, which I just think is just adds to it. So you can tell it's not just some adult narrating some kid's life. It feels like you're sort of connecting with this young person in middle school, which is fun, for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. No, they're very real quandaries they're facing. They're not minimal because they're things experienced by kids. They're very real. And I think if we, can have stories and also be understanding about the fact that these are the real lived experiences these kids are having.
Right.
In my case, write fiction that kind of speaks to those sensibilities and, has their voice and, something that might be authentic from their life, in it, all to the better. I think that one of the cool things I try to think about sometimes is that, my books might be like a book that a kid really looks back on later as a book that they enjoyed when they were a kid, and really maybe help them think, maybe help boost their imagination, maybe help them just be entertained and laugh. All those things are, great accomplishments, I think, if it happens. So yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. And so, one thing that I was thinking of as I was reading the book too, or one of your books, is, if you had a magic pen show up at your house, when you were in 7th grade, what do you think that you would have wanted to draw? And you didn't know the consequences of it, one way or the other, but what do you think you would have wanted to draw as a teenager or tweenager?
Sure. Yeah. It kind of goes back to what we were talking about before we started. And that was, me potentially doing my own podcast, like you're doing one, I think I absolutely could. I think I have enough, ideas I could, but just not enough time in the day. So what if I had some duplicates of myself so I could get more done, simultaneously? That would be really nice. I think I'd have Jason who would go to work. I'd have Jason that work on podcasting. I'd have Jason that would write. I'd have Jason that would clean, Jason that would go grocery shopping, and I think one of my favorite superheroes is a character called the Multiple Man, who's one of the X-Men characters. And just because that power captures my imagination, I'm like, it'd be great to have some doubles of yourself. You get more done. So that's probably what I would do.
Wow, I didn't even think about that. That is a fantastic answer. And that was exactly what I would do too. Oh my goodness. Yeah. there's only so many hours in a day. So how do you balance? So you have a full-time career that that you enjoy doing and stuff. So how do you balance, a full-time career and writing?
Sure. Yeah. On top of, lots of other things in life, like friends and, there's
Right.
other things you want to do and
Yes.
spending time with my wife and so forth. Yeah, it is difficult. There's been some periods where I've been out of work and I haven't been working. And so I got a lot of writing done as a
Sure.
result. But when I'm working full time, it's like, I really, don't have a lot of time or energy to do it, or really willingness to look at a computer after looking at one at work, for most of the day, coming home and be like, am I really going to type on a keyboard and look at a
Right.
computer some more? So
So
it's
true.
really, I found a lot of having to be patient and kind of pick my battles in terms of like, when am I going to do something, and just kind of chip away at it more slowly and be satisfied with slower progress. So for
Yeah.
me, it's really a Saturday or a Sunday, blocking out a few hours, leaving the house, going to a coffee shop, going to a library, finding a quiet room, and just, writing some pages there, and just kind of little by little doing it.
Yeah.
And knowing that, without being a full-time writer, my progress is going to be slower, and just, being content with that.
Yeah.
It's just really the proper application of my resources, my time, my energy, and
Right.
brain power, all that stuff.
Yeah. Well, I think I appreciate that, because it's, quality, not quantity.
Mhm.
And sort of one philosophy that I always live by is, it's about progress, not perfection, and so if you're,
Mhm.
putting a dent in things, it doesn't need to be done overnight. And I always kind of poke fun at my mother-in-law and my mom, because my mother-in-law always says Rome wasn't built in a day, because I always want to I'm very ambitious, want to do a million things. I have 1,000 projects going right now. And then my mom was always like, then my mom always says, when in Rome. It's like, she comes to me and gotta have a lobster roll, when in Rome, um, it's like every time, every time I see her, it's like, when in Rome. Like anytime she visits, I probably hear that like 20 times during her visits here. And then, my mother-in-law, I'm like, oh God, I really need, I need to paint this room. This is gonna be my office. It was kind of like a teal before. She's like, Rome wasn't built in a day. I'm like, I know, but it needs to get done. But it's cute. I say that with, they're both two wonderful women, so they're awesome. But it's pretty funny how they both have their own
Philosophy.
perception of that. Yes,
It's kind of like
exactly.
having two different Jiminy Crickets on your shoulders, right? Like telling you different things. Yeah.
Yes, that is no, that is so true. Especially with my mom, I'm always thinking that, and I'm in my 40s, and I'm always still like, what do I like? Like my mom is like, what would my mom think about if should I do that? She's probably not gonna like that, or like I should probably edit that out, because she's not gonna like, when she listens, because my parents listen to the show religiously. Like if I say something, my mom's not gonna like that, so it's gonna come out.
They're kind of in the room, even if they're not there, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's funny how that works. Their influence continues, even when you're
Yeah, absolutely.
middle-aged adult. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, so to kind of take a step away from, your writing. So I know one thing that you're, very passionate about, and kind of why we're, sort of on the same page about things, is you're really into 80s pop culture. So thankfully you'll be coming back to discuss our top 10 favorite 80s movies soundtracks, which is
Yes.
very exciting. Yeah, we'll do that in a few weeks, but I thought maybe we could end on some nostalgia rapid fire questions that I like to ask guests on the show, just to sort of kind of see where, what life was like back in a simpler time when, we had as I always like to say, we had that an analog childhood and a
Mhm.
digital adulthood, which I
Yep.
think sums it up quite well. So if you
It
are,
does.
yeah, it's just it's a good thing and a bad thing what's happened. Um,
Mhm.
but if you're up for it, we could do a couple of those questions.
Sure, absolutely. Now you're looking for kind of like one sentence answers to truly go faster.
No, you can definitely elaborate, because I think
Okay.
people, the base of this show are people that are, just love reliving memories from their childhood. So I think the more that you want to add to that, the better.
Sure.
So yeah.
Reminiscing and so forth. Yeah.
Yeah,
No,
and I always find that, people's answers kind of stir up my brain too, and I usually have something to kind of add to it. So
yeah,
um,
absolutely.
okay. All right. So let's see. The first question is, it's always a fun one. What record, tape, or CD, whatever medium you prefer, did you listen to so much that you wore it out or broke it or got scratched to hell? What would that be for you?
Sure, sure. It was audio cassettes for me, definitely. I didn't have
Yeah.
CDs till I got into college, honestly.
Yeah.
So very much was audio cassette family and audio cassette kid. I had a double cassette tape, boombox in my room.
Mhm.
I didn't have a whole lot of tapes of my own. I borrowed a lot of my sister's and my dad's tapes, and I actually had a Walkman that ate one of my dad's tapes. It was Dire Straits. My dad was a huge Dire Straits fan. I'm a huge
Nice.
Dire Straits fan as a
Yeah.
result. And he had copied a record album onto an audio cassette so we could listen to it in the car, and I kept borrowing it. And
Wow.
the tape broke inside the Walkman, and the tape was like intertwined with the Walkman so
Oh,
much that it was just like you'd have to take it apart, And this
Yeah.
happened on the school bus, and I remember going home just dreading my dad's reaction. He's going to be so mad that his tape broke and stuff.
Right.
And he was just so nonchalant about it. It was such a
Wow.
relief. He was just
that's
kind of
nice.
like, "Oh, I'll just tape it again. That was just a recording." And he
Yeah.
was like, "Let's go get you a new Walkman." And we went and got me a new Walkman that same day. So
Oh,
that was so kind of him, and
yes.
just very understanding. But yeah, it was a Dire Straits. I think it was Alchemy, which is their live double live album that they did. That's
Yeah.
awesome. I still love to this day.
Yeah.
And that was the one. And I just remember that dread, like, oh, what's he gonna do to me? And it's
Right.
like, oh no, he was actually pretty zen about it.
Yeah. Yeah. Isn't that funny what you kind of can envision your head's, your parents' reaction to something that, is like, that dread that you have as a child. I remember I think I had like a little playhouse or clubhouse in quotation marks underneath my bed as a kid. And I accidentally like knocked over my lamp and it cracked on the ground. And I thought my dad was going to be like so angry at me and so mad. And he like could care less because, I didn't do it on purpose and
Yeah.
it was a lamp. But I think for like hours I was dreading like, oh my God, my dad's going to be so angry. It's like,
Right.
Yeah.
And for them to just kind of be calm and just be like, yeah, accidents happen, whatever. Right. It's not a big deal to them, and they move on. But
Right.
to us, speaking of a child's perspective, right, that is a universe shaking event, right?
Right. Like 3 hours of panic. And then
Yes.
it was over in about 5 seconds. Like, oh, okay, we'll go get another lamp or we'll go get another Walkman.
Yeah.
But that's nice that you had the Walkman. That's good. That's good stuff. Those are priceless. And go for a good penny now. At least the early ones. That is for sure.
Yeah. Absolutely. I wish I still had it. I don't anymore. I think I gave it to a Goodwill or something during one of my moves.
Yeah.
And I don't have it anymore. I'm like, oh, I wish I did. That'd be kind of cool.
Those are so much fun. Let's see. The next question is, what movie from the 80s or 90s could you watch on repeat?
It might depend on what day you ask me what the answer to that is. Right now, I'd say Beverly Hills Cop, Eddie Murphy at the top of his game.
Yeah.
I find that movie hilarious. It's my sense of humor all the way. And I love how he's not a fish out of water. Everybody else is around him. And I love that. And he can bluff his way into any situation. Everybody believes him because of the strength of his personality and his charisma and his humor. And it's a great action comedy. It's got a lot of 80s, sinister guys in suits and sunglasses up to no good and with Uzis and stuff. But then you've also got the cops who are slightly goofy, trying to figure out what the bad guys are up to. And that's one I could watch over and over again. Plus, speaking of music, a great soundtrack.
Yes.
Right? The Pointer Sisters. And
oh God, I love the Pointer Sisters.
Me too.
Oh God, they're the best.
They
oh
are.
my God. I think that's like a universal language. It's like when you hear, jump or that is nobody's like, oh, turn that off. Everybody, that is just a universal, please, turn it up because oh my God.
Neutron dance. Yeah. It makes you want to drive fast and get into a car chase. Yeah.
Yes. Oh my God. Yeah. And I remember we had some, when you're in elementary school, that you have some of the most random, maybe you experienced this, but we had the most random people come in for assemblies. So we had this guy that was really good at jump rope and could lay down and do a jump rope thing that we watched for an unnecessary length of time. And somebody came in with reptiles or whatever. And somebody came into with a keyboard or something, and then they showed us how to play Axel F or whatever cool. The keyboard. It was such a 80s assembly. You know?
as 80s as you can get, right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Oh my God.
I listen to Axel F at least once a week, if not once every 2 weeks. So,
Yeah, I know.
you're
How
not
could you not? Yeah, how can you not get like fired up to that song too? I mean,
oh, you just want to strut around to it, just like Eddie Murphy did, and
right.
that was also a very 80s thing for a character to have their own personal theme music that kind of
Yeah,
played over there. And lots of scenes of them walking places and
right.
sneaking into places and their music's playing. They don't really do that in TV or movies anymore. And I think it's a lost art. It's a shame because you
Yeah,
hear that theme,
so
you
true.
think automatically of Axel Foley and those
Right.
movies.
That's so true. That is a very good point. And and sitcoms don't have the infamous kitchen door that flaps, back and forth.
Yeah.
That's yeah. I need to research why that was like standard and why there's like two sets of staircases in sitcoms.
Yeah, there's always like back stairs and front stairs. And
right.
I remember there was always one person that it's in my adult life, military quarters were usually pretty standard, but
Yeah.
in my adult life, I think I met one friend, their house had two staircases. And I was like, you're like the house on the Cosby Show, that's really
Yes.
cool. And they're
Yeah.
like, we noticed that when we moved in, because they're
Right.
the same age I am. So they automatically thought of that.
Right.
Like, oh, the Huxtables.
Right. Yeah. Is your house a set of different strokes because they had a spiral staircase that came into the kitchen? Like, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Those little features just jumped out at you, and you're like, "Oh, maybe my house someday will be like that,"
Right. You're like rich, like Mr. Drummond. Oh wait, no, I'm not. But yeah, funny those
Right.
those common themes in movies and TV are sort of
Mhm.
a thing of the past. That is for sure, which is
Yeah.
unfortunate. Well, speaking of sitcoms, I guess good lead into that question. Which sitcom from the 80s or 90s, but I think 80s is certainly an important era for you. Could you watch on repeat?
Yeah, that's a good question when it comes to the 80s because we didn't have a whole lot of TV in the
Oh,
house
right.
in the 80s. So I would
Yes.
have to pull it from the 90s.
Yeah.
It was Seinfeld. Absolutely Seinfeld.
Yeah.
You might notice a theme with me, like the goofier the thing is, the more Jason's probably going to like it. And
Yeah.
I keep watching that show episode by episode over and over again because the characters are just goofy and absurd. The situations they get into are just nuts and like it's hilarious. And I have a lot of good memories of watching that show. My aunt who lived in the States would record it for us on VHS and send it to us in Germany when I was in high school.
Oh my gosh.
Other shows too, but that was definitely one of them. And I remember my dad and I watching those together, just cracking up. So
Yeah.
good memories of that being a show that I enjoyed with them, too. So yeah, that Seinfeld for sure.
Wow. And that is so, so telling. I don't know what the right word is, but that the extent with which you had to go to actually be able to watch the show. I mean, that is
Yeah.
that's
Kids
pretty
now with the
serious.
internet, they probably have access to anything and everything they want. But back then
Right.
it was like movies came about 6 months to a year later.
Yeah.
Over there to the military theaters. You could go watch a movie in a German theater. It usually be in English with German subtitles. I didn't do a whole lot of that. And yeah, for TV shows, you had Armed Forces Network or you better speak German, And Armed Forces Network had a really limited amount of content on it because it was just one channel, so they were very choosy about what was on there and we didn't watch a whole lot of it. And so, yeah, my one aunt like recorded all the shows and sent them to us, Star Trek Deep Space Nine, the X-Files, to the point my friends would be like, hey, has your aunt sent any more tapes? Because they'd want to see it too, because they're all in the same boat as me there, because the content was, you were behind by a few months to a year, at least if you ever got to see it at all.
Yeah. Wow, that's so true. And did you eventually one day did you buy your aunt like all of the seasons of Seinfeld on DVD or something like that? Or
oh, I should have, yeah. No, but I did like visiting her because she had an epic movie collection because she had all the movie channels and she would she was the aunt that had like HBO and Cinemax and like Nickelodeon and like so when we would go to visit her, she'd have all these movies that she'd recorded on the VHS tapes and she recorded a lot of movies for us too. I had for a long time all these VHS tapes she'd given me that had, you record on slow play and so you could fit like 3 movies on a tape.
Yes.
I had a bunch of those and that was the only way I had them. I didn't have a whole lot of original movies, so I had her to thank. She was kind of my AV aunt.
Nice. My aunt's like that too. She buys like every DVD that comes out and always has like the the latest and greatest like nice TV to watch stuff on. She's a big big movie buff and TV buff. Yeah, it's that's pretty funny. And my mom had somebody that she worked with that knew how to dub stuff onto VHS. So I'd be like, can you rent Grease from Blockbuster and please record it onto,
Yeah. Nope.
You know,
Yeah, you remember that stuff. Like I was a huge Star Wars fan as a kid, and I
Mhm.
only got to see the movies in the theater. But there was one family in our neighborhood who, yeah, had the fancy VCR setup, the fancy TV, and they
Yeah.
recorded all three movies for us. And they were on these like a black kind of clamshell case that you would open up. It was really
Yeah.
hard to open, and the label was typewritten, by them. But
Wow.
they were really good copies of all three of the movies until I got the originals, eventually
Yeah.
later on, I think when I was in high school. But before that, that's what I had. And yeah,
Wow.
I was so like, this is awesome. I've got all three Star Wars movies. Like I can watch at home anytime I want.
Yes. I'm like, yeah, you must have really appreciated that kind of stuff, things that, us in the States sort of, yeah, kind of took for granted. That's wow. Well, I can see why you're
Yeah.
nostalgic for that time too. Yeah.
Yeah, no, definitely. And something people have forgotten about is that VHS tapes were super expensive for a while there. Like, what were they, like $70,
Yeah.
65
Yeah.
for one movie? And
Right.
so there was a while there where it's like, yeah, it's recorded or nothing. You see it
Right.
in the theater, you get a recording of it somehow, or that is it. You're not
Right.
buying that movie at all.
Yes. And I think it was, I want to say the first VCRs, I think it was something between maybe like 500 to like or $1,000 just to get a VHS player. I mean,
Yep.
and so that was just not doable for, that alone was just not doable for a lot of people. Is just, I
Oh
mean,
yeah. Ours was
no.
on layaway for a long time. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, when's the VCR coming? It's like, it's gonna be 4 months, honey. You gotta be patient. It's like, I want it now. It's like, it's not gonna come now.
Right. We only have $750 left to pay on it.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Oh God, the crazy times. Crazy times.
Oh yeah.
Um, let's see. We got a few more here. What was your favorite cereal to eat as a kid?
That's a great question because my mom and dad did not let us eat a lot of sugary cereals.
Hmm.
So when I was in high school, they got a little more lax. So apple cinnamon Cheerios was my go-to in high school.
Nice. That's a good one.
As a little kid, on the off chance my parents might buy Life cereal,
Mhm.
that was like, because normally it was just like Cheerios and Honey Nut Cheerios, and that was about all Raisin
Yeah.
Bran, about what we had at home. So when I spent the night at a friend's house, and the next morning they pulled out like the Fruit Loops or something like that, it was just like the light coming down, just this is what breakfast cereal could be,
Right. That's so true. I'm so sheltered. But my parents, we had the same as mostly Cheerios.
Yeah, it's like,
the
go rot your
staple.
teeth, kid. Yeah,
Right. Yeah, it's so true. Yeah. Yeah. Lots of Cheerios in our house.
yeah,
Yeah.
same.
Can't go wrong. Let's see. What was your well, I guess depending on kind of where you were at the time, and I know you didn't watch a ton of TV, but is there a Saturday morning cartoon that you remember watching a lot as a kid?
Yeah. So, there was a period of 6 months we lived with my grandparents. And that was what my dad was in Germany, where he was waiting for quarters to open up so our whole family could come join him, someplace big enough that we could be with them. And so we were with them in Indiana for 6 months. That's where a lot of our TV watching heyday came from, was also from that period. But that's also where my Saturday morning cartoon phase came from. I was in kindergarten, so I was the right age.
Yeah.
And I would say Super Friends. My sister and I watched a lot of Super Friends together, and to this day love DC superheroes. That was probably how I learned about Superman and Wonder Woman, etc. Was from cartoon. And then Smurfs. Loved the Smurfs. Dug the Smurfs. The comic books. My parents bought me the little figurines of the Smurfs that were all different, with their little specialty or whatever.
Right.
I remember watching those two a lot. Those were probably two of my favorites.
Yeah. I definitely remember this. I definitely remember watching the Smurfs, and one cartoon. I feel like I've seen it kind of posted a lot lately, and I think it's like turning 40 is Alvin and the Chipmunks.
Turning 40. Oh my
Yeah,
word.
I think so. Yeah,
Wow.
I think it was.
I remember that being on. Yeah.
Yeah. And then once I saw that posted, I could not, and of course now it's happening right now too, is now I cannot get that theme song stuck, out of my head.
Yeah.
And, it's amazing that somebody just recorded their voice and sped it up, and then look what happened,
Yeah, that's all it took. Yeah, a whole industry got created out of it, basically a whole franchise.
Right.
Out of a guy doing that. That was a novelty back then, to speed up your voice.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, no, totally. I remember the Pac-Man cartoon. I don't know if you remember that. That was another one I liked when I was a kid. I always liked Pac-Man.
Yeah.
Just the imagery of Pac-Man. And so the cartoon I really dug.
Yeah.
Dungeons and Dragons. My sister and I watched the Dungeons and Dragons cartoon.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I was kind of tickled that the movie that came out recently, those characters have a cameo appearance, like in
Hmm.
the background. And I was
Nice.
like, oh, I remember those 7, kids who, yeah, in that cartoon.
Yeah.
That was very cool. Nice shout out.
Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing how they do stuff now to target,
Mhm.
target our demographic now. It's
Oh
pretty
yeah.
funny with the nostalgia. I was in the grocery store today and there was a retro recipe Golden Grams cereal box, which I'm like, what? I guess did the
What is
ingredients
that?
or the recipe change a lot, I guess. And so they have like kind of like the sort of like the font that looks kind of like late 70s, early 80s sort of
Oh,
font is really interesting. It's like, oh, so
interesting. They're hoping
yeah,
parents buy that for their kids, but also eat it themselves, I'm sure. And
yeah,
yeah, that
yeah,
that would be wild. I'd love to do a taste test and see what is the difference here. Is there really a difference?
right.
I'm
Yeah, it's like,
curious.
what does that mean? Because who remembers what the ingredients were in the cereal that they, but
Yeah,
must be, I'm sure I'm missing something, but yeah, I thought that was pretty funny.
that's
Yeah, and
wild.
I think I'm trying to think if the Smurfs I know the Trolls have gotten like movies now, and that was kind of in their they were in their heyday in the 80s and 90s. I'm trying to think if the
The
Smurfs have had a
Smurfs
live
have had a
action.
couple cartoons. Yeah.
Yeah, a
Um,
couple incarnations. Yeah,
a little bit more 3D animation, and then I think celebrities doing the voices.
yeah,
Um, but I've never seen them, so I have no idea what the quality is or if I like them or not. But
right. Yeah, it would be hard to once when you grow up on the original, it's really hard to reboots are
yeah,
I get it, but at the same time, I'm kind of not a huge fan of some of the reboot stuff.
yeah, same.
Um, yeah, yeah, my sister and I loved the Smurfs too, and I remember she got me I wonder if I have it somewhere, but she bought me a Papa Smurf figurine, and
Oh,
she saved
cool.
the yeah, and she saved the receipt, and we just always laughed about it because on the receipt it said Smurf, comma Papa, 3.99 or whatever.
Like that's his actual name. Yeah,
Yeah, it was like so stupid, but just made us laugh so hard, like, oh, Smurf, comma Papa.
that's really funny.
Yeah,
I had
it's
one of those little Smurfs on my desk at work for a long time. When I had a desk, now I'm like a hybrid employee who goes in and just finds a desk, wherever he happens to find one.
yeah.
I work at home the rest of the time, but
Hmm.
I had a little figurine when I worked for a telecommunications company. I had a little figurine of like a Smurf who's on the telephone. Basically.
Perfect. Yeah.
I kind of went out looking for it. I was like, I want to have this on my desk. There's got to be a Smurf on the phone, and sure enough, there was.
Perfect. I'll probably on like a rotary phone or yeah.
Yep. Yeah, it
Yeah.
was a rotary phone. Yeah, I think sitting on the ground next to him with a cord, and
Yeah.
yeah,
Perfect. Oh, that's perfect. Love it. What a good addition. That makes me I have like some Ninja Turtles and stuff. I should find those and put those on my desk too. But
oh, cool. At least
yeah.
rotate them. Have a different one out every few months. Yeah.
Yeah. That's yeah. And I gotta find that Smurf, comma Papa. Gotta find that
Yeah.
somewhere. It's somewhere.
Smurf comma Papa.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, that easily amused thing is like I could think about that in 10 years and I would still be laughing and so
Yeah.
dumb.
There's some things that make you chuckle no matter what. Yeah.
Right, exactly. Yeah, yeah. Nostalgia is a good thing.
Mhm.
All right. So my last question is, and I guess this is sometimes gets more serious answers and it doesn't have to have one, but it doesn't have to have a serious answer. But if you could go back in time to your childhood or adolescence, what do you think you would do first?
Yeah, probably one of two things. One would be, go back to what I alluded to earlier, which was the big hangout sleepover times with your friends. You have
Yeah.
3, 4, 5 of your buddies over, and you're just goofing off with them. You're watching movies, you're playing video games. We're probably playing a Nintendo,
Mm.
and we're probably watching Jean-Claude Van Damme movies or Arnold Schwarzenegger movies.
Watching them do the splits between two chairs.
Right, lots of roundhouse kicks, lots of watching Predator, watching Terminator 2, like any of those.
Yeah.
Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, that was a big one for a while
Oh
there.
yes.
We were right in the middle of the mania that was around that movie, and we watched it over and over again. I think I had that on VHS, and
Yeah.
just staying up late and just talking about just life and video games and movies and comic books and girls and
Yeah.
just the stuff that we would just and just the camaraderie, like I said earlier, you really miss that. So either that or, I would go back to my dad and I had a hobby that we did together, and I was collecting comic books. Actually, back here on the shelf is the remainder of the collection that
Oh
I've kept
wow.
on those shelves back there. They're all in plastic bags and cardboard
Wow.
backs to protect them.
Yeah.
And It used to be much bigger, but I pared it down. I got tired every time we moved having to lug these boxes, around.
Sure. Yeah.
A lot of nostalgia around this shared hobby he and I used to do together. We'd visit the comic book store together, and the
Yeah.
proprietor would always have like the ones that had come in that week that he'd set aside for us that we'd requested, and
Yeah.
we'd hang out and chat with him for a while. And then usually in the middle of my dad running a bunch of errands, but we'd have this kind of fun thing we did at the end. We'd go to the comic book store and sometimes get lunch together at like Hardee's or White Castle or something. And
Yeah.
so to go back and be able to do that with him again as a kid would be a lot of fun,
Yeah.
joking around together and just kind of being together,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, those are two great answers. God, what in White Castle and Hardee's. That's
Right.
the last one that comes to. Yeah.
Yeah, you think about two chains that aren't really a going concern now, not
Right.
like they used to be.
Yes. Yeah, I know. Yeah, we ate. My great grandfather liked White Castle burgers a lot. So like on weekends with my dad, when we would go see him, my dad would often get White Castle, and I think that's like the last time I remember having White Castle was decades and decades ago. But that's too funny. It's good to know that there's other people that were raised on the occasional visit to White Castle. It's it's a good comfort. It's a good comfort.
Yeah, very occasional. My dad
Yeah.
was a healthy eater and in really good shape. He was in the military, but
Sure.
every so often he'd want to go binge, and I think him and his son, that was the time to do it. He knew I'd be there for it. Like,
Yeah.
let's do this.
Yeah. Well, that's so perfect. What a nice memory. That like and having that still continuing I couldn't tell if I thought maybe those were records. But that's so great that you still have that stuff. That's really cool.
Yeah, most of them bought in the 80s and the early 90s, and
Yeah.
some of them bought in the Stars and Stripes bookstore on the military bases in
wow.
Germany when I was a kid.
Wow.
They had a whole section that was comic books at that point.
Yeah.
I don't think the stores exist anymore because of Amazon and everything. I don't think that they're really around anymore.
Yeah.
But yeah, I kept a lot of them. Some of them have gotten signed by creators, a couple of them.
Wow.
But for the most part, I've kept them for nostalgia. People have asked me, are those valuable? I'm like, not really. They're from an era when everybody was buying comics. So,
Mhm.
there's them in existence. There's no scarcity to create a lot of demand for it. So I'm like, they're not really worth a lot in terms of money, but they're worth a lot in terms of the nostalgia, in terms of just the good memories that I have with them.
Yeah.
So I imagine I'll keep them forever. I don't know
Yeah.
what happens to them after I die, but probably get sold off. But yeah, it's a cool thing to hold on to, and I pared it down to a manageable.
Yeah. Yeah. I know my I think I had a bunch of comic books too, and I ended up selling them, and then I felt kind of bad because then like a year or two later my kids were all of a sudden were interested in asking about them. Like, well,
Yeah.
they kind of sat in a box for like 20 years. So then I'm like, oh, darn it! Out of all the things they're asking about, it's like the one thing that I like finally I'm like, all right, this has been in like a box. I should just, there's somebody who would like to probably look at these and will appreciate them, and they should have them. And then of course the kids had to ask them about them.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
Well, that's okay.
But,
You can do a comic book store, to a library. They've got them there.
Yeah.
Which comics they were?
It was just a really random things I had acquired over the years that I didn't really even know what I was getting. I think a lot of it was like X-Men and stuff like that, probably from the 90s.
Oh yeah. Comics got
so-
huge at that point. Yeah. Big. The X-Men cartoon was on, and
Yes. Which I was like watching when I was like way too old, but I'm like, whatever, I don't care.
Yeah, same. I still watch it,
Yeah.
When I had COVID last fall, I wasn't really in shape to watch anything complicated, so I was
Sure.
watching cartoons on Disney Plus, and I was, and I could barely comprehend the plot because I was so out of it, but it was something, when I was not sleeping, it was something to do, and it was a lot of fun.
Yeah. Comfort via nostalgia is always a good thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, Jason, thank you so much for coming on the show and chatting about your books and growing up and the 80s and the greatest era of pop culture. I think we can both attest to. And like I mentioned before, Jason's going to come back to the show in a few weeks, and we'll be discussing some 80s soundtracks for movies, and I think maybe you have alluded to a couple things we'll be touching on, I'm sure, during that episode.
Yes.
But before we wrap up, so Jason, where can people find you and your books and your website, social media, all that good stuff? Where can people find you?
Yeah, thank you. Well, thank you for having me, and
Yeah,
thank you, for taking the time and asking some great questions. It really made me think. So definitely appreciate it, and thanks for having me on your podcast.
sure.
So you can find me on my website, www.jasonrlady. Got to get the R in there, the middle initial.
Yep.
.com, and that's where you can find information about my books as well as links to purchase them if you so want to, as well as information about me and links to different interviews that I've done and stuff like that. My books are on Amazon, pretty easy to find because of my name.
Mhm.
Jason Lady is not very
Yeah.
common.
Yeah.
Uh, I'm on Twitter as Jason Lady Author. I'm on Facebook as Jason R Lady Author, and I am on Instagram as Jason R Lady Author. If you follow me on those, I'm not someone that's got something posted every single day, but
Yeah.
I
Same.
do squeeze out content every week, every couple of weeks. So I won't be inundating you with stuff if you follow me. So don't worry about that.
Perfect. Yes, and I'll make sure that that's all of that information too is in the show notes as well, so people can find you. So yeah, well, thanks for being on, and we'll chat again in a few weeks about more stuff on the '80s.
That sounds great. I'm looking forward to it.
All right.